Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Rei-Lin bringing you another Armored Warfare Premium Tank review. Today it's going to be one of the final premium tanks in the game, the Tier 5 WZ-1224. This is the new Chinese premium tank, and I think it's a pretty good tank. It's a main battle tank, and it opens up the Chinese Mr. Zhang Chinese main battle tank line. There's two ways to open up the Chinese main battle tanks. You may know by now you can either do a bunch of damage in PvP or PvE, or you can just buy the WZ-1224, which will instantly unlock the line for you to start grinding away and getting the Chinese main battle tanks. Basically, this tank is pretty damn good. I actually like it. It's got a few flaws, all the tanks do, and it's actually a little bit different than the Russian tanks. A lot of the Chinese tanks, as you may or may not know, were based on Russian tanks. Before I get into the stats, if you're not interested in listening to me get into the stats, you can click at the top of your screen. I've got two replays for this tank. One is me playing in a PvE match, as usual, and another is from Mr. Manty of Circonflexes chat room. He's got a PvP match. So you can get a kind of a good idea, I would say, of where this thing stands in PvE and in PvP. For the rest of us, let's talk about the stats on this tank. Right off the bat, 355 damage with 325 millimeters of penetration. That is pretty much spot on for a Tier 5 main battle tank. The damage is not quite as good as the Russian tanks, but nothing really is. But it's pretty much right in the middle between all of the other nations' tanks. Damage per minute, 3,273. Keep in mind that some of the retrofits and my ammo type is obviously affecting the damage per minute. I'm using armor piercing because this is Tier 5. It does see Tier 6s and 7s, and maybe 8s, depending on how good or bad the matchmaker decides to be with you. And if I switch to the heat, the damage would go up to 414 with 278 millimeters of penetration. So if you end up fighting a bunch of Tier 3s, 4s, or 5s, you definitely want to switch over to the heat to gain a little bit more damage. The reload time is fairly decent, average of most main battle tanks at Tier 5 at 6.5 seconds. Most main battle tanks are between 6 and 9 seconds. The Russians have slightly longer reload times, but this is pretty good. It's not bad at all. The hit points, 1,620. That's not too bad for a Tier 5 main battle tank. It's pretty much right in the middle between all of the other nations, so not bad, not great, but pretty good. The hull, armor. Armor-wise, the Chinese tanks are pretty good, especially in the front. The 280 millimeters, 70 on the sides, and 55 at the rear. The modifiers are not good for the hull, though, so what you see is what you get. Angling, obviously, will improve the effectiveness of that armor, but as far as getting any extra bonuses from your modifiers, not here. The turret is also pretty darn healthy at 250 millimeters in the front, 200 on the side, and 75 at the rear. But the turret modifiers are also pretty damn good, and so in fact the turret is over 400 millimeters of effective armor in the front. For a Tier 5 to have that much armor, that's really damn good. Nothing at Tier 5 and lower is going to go through the front of your turret. It's just not going to happen. And if you want to take a look, the weak points, there's really nothing on the top of the turret that you're going to hit. I mean, it's angled kind of funky, like almost like a leopard a little bit. So shots just really aren't going to go in if you're shooting the turret. However, when we get to the gun later on, you understand why that is kind of hard to do, to go hull down with this thing. Anyway, moving on, the max speed is nearly 65 kilometers an hour. Very good for a big-ass armored heavy tank. And it only takes 7.65 seconds to get from 0 to 32 kilometers an hour. So the Chinese tanks, and especially this one, are kind of maneuverable. Now, you're definitely not getting anywhere close to AFV or light tank speeds. Camouflage, 0.13, not really that important on a main battle tank. You're not going to be sniping in this tank. View range, 385, that's not bad. The average is around 400 meters for most Tier 5 main battle tanks. So a little bit under that. You can improve that, obviously, with the crew and retrofits if you want, but that's not horrible. And for a main battle tank, it's, it's okay. But here's where the tank kicks you right in the nuts a little bit. If you're used to playing the Chinese tanks in World of Tanks, it's going to be fairly easy for you to play this tank. With only 3 degrees of cannon depression over the front and 2 degrees over the rear. 3 degrees is terrible gun depression. And I'm sure there are a lot of tank destroyer people out there that know all about having shitty cannon depression over the front. And that's what I was talking about. Going hull down in this is kind of hard because you just don't have the gun depression to shoot out of the frickin' hole. So you can kind of sit behind a ridgeline or some junk, hiding that lower plate, and you can make use of the turret armor if you know where to go. Turret traverse is also kind of slow, 33.45 degrees a second. It's not the slowest, but it could be a little bit better considering how crappy the gun depression is, in my opinion. The accuracy is 0.12. It's not great, and it's not horrible. It's kind of in the middle. It's sort of average. Russian tanks generally have even worse accuracy, but this is not the best. It's not that great. Like I said, you're not going to be sniping in this tank. The aim time is 2.12 seconds. It's not overly horrible because you do have the armor to kind of sit out there and aim a little bit longer than most tanks without the good armor, but it's not the best in the world. So either way, you're trying to make use of crappy gun depression is going to put you in a lot of very awkward places in this tank. Now, unlike in World of Tanks, where 3 degrees of gun depression really can kill you because you really don't have many places for certain types of tanks to go in World of Tanks. Usually every map, the heavy tanks go there, the medium tanks go there, the light tanks go there, and it never really changes unless, you know, it's towards the end of the game and everyone's just rushing to get the last few kills. Now, in Armor Warfare, most of the tanks are a lot more mobile, so in this regard, you can drive this thing around and make places that you can get to and make use of that cannon depression. Even though it's only 3 degrees, there's a lot more places where you can get down a slope a little bit and hide your lower plate, or get on some flat ground like a road or in a city and city fight. That's pretty much what this is made to do. You want to get right up in front of them and use your turret armor to just bully everybody. But with the gun depression, bullying isn't exactly your strong point either, because with the gun depression only 3 degrees, you're not going to be able to aim down and shoot the lower plate of enemy tanks if you're point blank. So it's kind of a hit or miss with the gun depression being as bad as it is. A lot of people have made this tank work, and I can make this tank work. It's just a little bit of a chore to do it. And you don't have really the alpha damage of, say, the Russian tanks or tank destroyers or something like that to really scare people off. But I will say, if you look down here at the retrofits, you have 3 universal slots down here on your retrofits. And that's really important because this allows you to kind of tailor the tank to more or less what you want it to be. If you want to load it up with tons of damage retrofits, you can get the damage up to over 400, even with your armor piercing. If you want to load this up with reload reductions, you can get the reload into the 5-second mark. You can set it up kind of however you want the tank to be. If you're platooning with other people that are also driving this thing, you can each pick your poison. One could be damage, one could be a DPS, you know, as far as a reload time, when one could be health, for example. You could put a bunch of armor mods in there and get the health over 2,200 or so. So it's not bad. And with the armor plus a lot of health, or armor plus, you know, you can just kind of do whatever you want. It's personal preference. This thing is going to cost you 1,500 gold. And if we hit the purchase gold, we can see exactly how much that's going to run you. At $6.99, basically a $7 tank. Do I think this tank is worth the gold? To be honest, yes. It's $7, and the main draw of this tank is the armor, because at Tier 5, most of the other Tier 5 tanks don't have quite the armor with the mobility of this tank. Believe it or not. For comparison's sake, I actually unlocked most of the Chinese tanks over the last few weeks. That's why I was kind of holding off doing this review. And this is the actual Tier 5 you get, the Type 80-2. This is fully upgraded, and this is the premium tank. As you can see, the damage is only 1 more on the Type 80. But look at the penetration. And this is the penetration with the armor-piercing shells. The penetration is not getting any higher on this tank, and it's terrible. You don't really want to be at Tier 5 and under 300 millimeters of penetration, or you're just not even going to go through the lower plates of most Tier 6 and 7 main battle tanks, especially from the front. You're a main battle tank. You're going to be brawling. You're going to be going up against other main battle tanks from the front. So that is kind of a eh. The damage per minute is a little bit higher, but again, don't have my WZ set up for just pure damage. And I do have a damage mod in there, but not all of it is damage. So I could make this number even bigger than the Type 80s. The reload time is slightly quicker on the Type 80, but I could also make my reload time even quicker on the WZ. It does have more health, but I could use the retrofits to give myself more health as well. But look at the armor, the hull, 150, 60, and 50. Now the hull modifiers on the Type 80 are better because the WZ is all one. So what you see is what you get. Here it's going to be a little bit higher, but even with these modifiers, those numbers don't even reach these numbers anywhere close. Nowhere close at all. And as you can see, it's kind of like it's flipped. The hull modifiers on the hull of the WZ suck, but they're good here. But on the WZ, if you look here now, you got the turret. The turret is a little bit better by far, 320, 240 on the side, and 60 at the rear. It's only weaker at the rear compared to the WZ, but the modifiers are only 1 on the turret of the Type 80. And what you see is what you get. But here, the modifiers are really good on the WZ, turning this into an effective thickness in the front of over 400 millimeters of armor, which is crazy good. Nothing at tier 5, 4, or 3 is going to go through the front of the turret on the WZ. It's just not going to happen. And even from the side, that's still almost 300 millimeters on the side of the turret. So hull down, the WZ is a beast. It's just that the gun depression is its biggest weak point. The Type 80 is slower all around. The camo is the same. It does have better view range, which does help a main battle tank. And the gun depression is 3 degrees more in the front, 4 degrees more over the rear. But the turret traverse is much slower. The accuracy is the same. And the aim time is worse. So overall, what you've got here is basically the WZ is almost like a much, much better Type 80-2. There's no reason, if you're going to buy the WZ-1224, there is no reason to buy the Type 80-2. It's just, unless you really, really like the look of the Type 80, and it does look kind of cool. If you like the look of this, then, you know, you're going to pick it up. But if you don't, then it just doesn't make any sense. Outside of the gun depression, really not comparable stat-wise. If you really can't stand the gun depression, if you don't like having 3 degrees, you don't like trying to figure out where to go on a map and making that gun depression really work for you, then you're not going to like the tank. All of the rest of the Chinese tanks from tier 5 on up basically gain more and more gun depression. By the time you get to the tier 8, you actually have 8 degrees of gun depression. But the problem with the Chinese tanks in general that I'm finding is from tier 6 and up. So 6, 7, and 8. The Chinese line, it's kind of like what's the point? Because every single comparable Russian tank is basically better. Armor is better, damage is way better, penetration is way better, health is generally better. The only thing the Chinese tanks seem to gain from tier 6 and up is gun depression. They have a little bit better gun depression than the Russian tanks, but they don't have the alpha, they don't have the pen, they have a little bit more mobility, but a main battle tank's mobility, I mean, if you're already doing 50 kilometers an hour, in my opinion, that's good enough. I mean, you're generally not trying to outflank light tanks in a main battle tank. If you can scoot around pretty good at 50, to me, that's not bad. You know, I mean, that's kind of like something you have to pick for yourself, whether you can fight the gun depression at tier 5, and then it gets better as time goes on with the tier 6, 7, and 8 Chinese tanks. You know, this kind of doesn't even play like the rest of the line, which is kind of weird. It doesn't really prepare you for having tier 6 and 7, you know, gun depression or armor and things like that. They generally have inferior armor on the sides and rear especially, and they have some comparable armor on the front of the hull and the turret, but generally the Chinese line, right now, I don't see what the niche is. They do have a little bit faster hull traverse, a little bit faster 0 to 32 kilometers an hour speeds, but overall, they're just not holding up, in my opinion, to the Russian line, which is kind of, you know, kind of sucks. I would think that the Chinese line were meant to be fast firing, lower alpha, slightly lower penetration, but not so low that you can't penetrate the lower plate of any same tier tank, or even a tier above that. And most of the Chinese tanks have very weak alpha and very weak penetration, unfortunately. However, the WZ-1224 does almost everything great. If it had more gun depression, I think it'd be a little bit overpowered in a lot of ways, to be honest. It's fast, it's maneuverable, and it does do well in the armor department. I mean, it does everything except good gun depression. So, in my opinion, I think it's worth the $7. Your opinion might change based on whether or not you can stand having the 3 degrees of gun depression. Moving on to the commander. Of course, I'm using Maximilian because I use Maximilian in all of my premium tanks. He's just the most well-rounded commander. If you don't have him, you're going to just have to take your pick from your favorite commanders. I don't think any one commander is a very good main battle tank commander. That's going to be up to complete personal preference. I'm sure there are people out there that have their opinions on who's technically the best. For me, it's Maximilian. The crew, I don't have a level 5 crew, unfortunately, so I do not have both of my skills. But first off, I took Spin to Win over off-road driving. The ground resistance on this thing is good. It's only okay. But the problem is because you only have 3 degrees of gun depression, you're going to be looking for places on the map that are basically flat. Like, say, in the city, somewhere hard, where you can get the tank in a position to where the 3 degrees is not actually as detrimental as it would be if you're in a hilly area or going up or down a slope or anything like that. You want flat ground. So off-road driving is not going to help in that regard, especially if you have to sit around on a lot of flat ground, and most of the flat ground is in cities where off-road driving is not necessarily going to kick in. However, because the whole traverse is only okay, and the turret traverse is also kind of slow, to stay on target if you're trying to snipe or get on somebody that's trying to circle strafe you, I decided for right now I would take the whole traverse speed and get it up to snuff, just so that it turns a little bit quicker and it makes it harder for tanks to get around you and circle strafe you, because even though you do have some good turret armor, the sides of your hull are not very good. The second skill will obviously be off-road driving, because I think off-road driving is really, really good for everybody. On the gunner, aim speed. This tank doesn't have quite as nasty an aim time as a base, about 2.5 seconds or so, which is improved obviously by your retrofits and your crew. This is one way of improving it. Aim speed improved by 10%. For my second, I'm going to take rapid fire. The reload time on this tank is pretty good. I honestly think that the WZ is going to be, it's not a DPS monster, but improving the reload and getting it into the sub 5 second reload time would be extremely good for this tank. It has the penetration that it needs for the tier. It doesn't have super good alpha, but it can fire very, very quickly with a maxed out crew and consumables and retrofits. So don't underestimate. Rapid fire, improve the reload time by 2.5 seconds. You have 3 ammo types. As usual, I never take anything that's high explosive. I think it's useless, especially in PvE. That might change in the future, but for now, I load exclusively armor piercing and heat. Now, how much of each one you take is completely up to you. That's personal preference. This is a tier 5, so it does see tier 6s and 7s, and if the matchmaking sucks, tier 8s. 278 millimeters of penetration is not going to go through the front of almost any tier 6, and definitely very few, if any, heavily armored targets at tier 7. So even 325 millimeters of penetration is probably not going to go through the front of many main battle tanks, especially at tier 7, but some weak points, especially lower plates in tier 6, you'll probably do all right. This, like I said, is personal preference, how many you want to take. It does hold quite a few rounds. Consumables, I always take spare parts, the energy drink, and medical kit. You can swap these more expensive versions of the repair kit and first aid kit out at your leisure. You might want to take the fire extinguishers if they ever do implement the ability for people to catch you on fire more often. Fire extinguishers would be good. You can swap out the energy bar for the protein bar, get a slightly half the boost, 2.5%. But that is personal preference. If you're going to do PvE like me, low, mid, or high tier field maintenance kit gives you 20% of your health back and gives you all of your ammunition back, and that is very useful, especially in PvE on longer maps. This thing doesn't fire necessarily fast enough to run out of ammunition. But if you're getting close to the end of a long match, Rolling Thunder, for example, and the only thing you have left is heat because you haven't been flipping back and forth, and you're facing down a bunch of Terminators, you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. Yeah, you can shoot the turret, but with the armor piercing, you can shoot anywhere and do damage. Anyway, that's personal preference. I definitely always take the PvE maintenance kits. For my retrofits right now, I take the experimental propellant to get 7.5% more damage. The Chinese tanks do not hit very hard, and this one doesn't hit very hard either. It's basically average for the tier of main battle tanks, but I always like to try, if I can, to get the DPS a little higher and make the shots hurt just a little bit more. This time I'm taking the gyroscopic stabilizers Mark II for the reload time and the aim time reduction. It's for almost 5% reload time reduction and almost 9.5% aim time reduction. So I'm kind of going about average. Instead of filling all of these up with just one thing where there's just all damage or all aim time or all reload speed, I'm kind of trying to do a little bit of everything so that I'm average at everything. The tank seems to be average at everything else, so I decided I might as well make the gun perform basically average as well. Advanced thermal sleeve, 7.5% reduction on the reload. I think that's really good. Obviously, there is no Mark III. It's unavailable. The gyroscopic stabilizers, if I get the XM8, that reload time will go up to almost 6% reduction, and the aim time will be at 11.25% reduction, which is fairly significant. So this is where you're going to get a lot of your aim time and reload time on top of the thermal sleeve. So this is as good as I can get it for now. I think this is an ideal setup, at least for me personally. And that, in a nutshell, is the WZ-1224. I think it's very good in a lot of situations. I don't think it's the best in all situations. The gun depression is probably the worst part about the tank. And if you want to see how good or bad this thing is in actual gameplay, I got a couple of replays for you. The first one is a PvE match done by yours truly. And the second is going to be from Mr. Manty. It's a PvP match where he takes this thing out for a spin. And you can see kind of how hardy this thing is, even against higher tier tanks. Hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you on the battlefield. And here we are on everyone's favorite map, Ghost Hunter. They changed this map quite a bit, actually, to make it a little bit less of a pain in the ass for people trying to defend the middle of the town on the third wave, where it used to be kind of just a slaughter fest of AI tanks, and if you didn't have any main battle tanks, you'd get overrun really quick, unless you had a lot of really good players. My team, I had no idea really what to expect. It's been a while since I actually played Ghost Hunter because it's just such a long, kind of sort of slow map that I generally don't like to use it in any kind of replays for you guys, just because it's kind of boring. You sit around a lot, and if your team's good, you're really going to sit around a lot. But I tried to get some decent replays on shorter maps in this thing, and I tended to either have a team that was so good that I ended up not being much of an actual main battle tank, or I ended up taking a lot of damage and not really bouncing much of anything to show you how kind of good the armor is in this thing. So either way, we got stuck with Ghost Hunter, and pretty much the first half of this game is just me defending the little cap zone here, playing a sniper. This thing is not really a sniper, but it's not exactly the worst accurate. It doesn't necessarily have the worst accuracy in the world either. It's decent enough to hit broadsides of tanks, fronts of tanks, but if you're trying to actually hit any kind of weak points from more than maybe 100 meters, you're just doing it wrong. I'm only kind of doing it because I've got a backup here, T-72. He's above on the hill to kind of support. I decided to go ahead and move into the cap just so I could support any tanks coming into the cap circle or just cutting across the field. As my teammates go around and get the secondary objectives, I decided to kind of ruin that guy's day and went ahead and shot the objective just before he got to it. It's alright. He's in a speedy enough vehicle that it didn't really matter. Now here's kind of what I was waiting for. I knew tanks were still spawning around the G0 line, and then I knew they would spawn here on the J0 line too, and kind of try to move up just like this guy into the cap, and that's kind of what I was waiting for, and here we go. Now, for some reason, this map gave us a lot of Bagel Panzers, and while that's kind of nice because they don't have any armor, they're light tanks, and that's perfect for me, it's also not very good at showing you how good the armor is on this thing when it works for you. The Bagopanzer's shells don't necessarily have that great of a penetrating value, so it's real easy to bounce shots from a Bago, especially in a main battle tank. As you see, we killed another Bagopanzer. They must have just had a sale on Bagopanzers. However, got caught off guard there, going for a different kill, and suddenly something spawned behind me. Oh, guess what? It's our worst enemy, the Stingray. The Stingrays have very good penetration values, actually, for a light tank, and so they can really wreck main battle tanks. They're one of the few types of tanks that have the penetration to kind of go through you from the front. But as you see, I've already bounced about 3 shots from him, and he's not bouncing anything because he just doesn't have the armor. And my teammate in the back finishes him off. Another Bago spawns. I'm absolutely not worried that he's going to penetrate me, and even if he does, it's just going to be a lucky shot that does a little tiny bit of damage. But even from that Stingray, you saw that I bounced several shots from him from the front. He bounced off my turret several times, and the Bago really doesn't have much of a chance unless I give him my side of even doing any damage. Even bounced a few of his shots. Now, I know that there's still going to be tanks spawning down the road there between F0 and G0, and maybe some that will spawn much later around the J0. But I didn't want to just keep hanging in the back and sniping, so I decided to push up. And since I started to push up, the other people on my team started to push up and get some spots, because now the cap has moved, and so tanks are now spawning there. Now here you can definitely see the slow-ass turret traverse. It's just, and then it's gone. So that is one of the reasons why I said that I want the hull traverse to spin a little faster, just so that when I'm trying to aim, I can spin the hull much quicker to assist with that. Here I was trying to get under the T-72's crappy gun depression, but it didn't work, and he hit me in the side. You don't want to be showing anybody the side or the rear of this tank. The side of the turret, maybe, depending on the tier. If it's a tier 3 or 4, you're probably okay. But if you give them any kind of hull on the side or rear, you're really just, you don't have the armor at all. So just don't do it. That was me in a panic mode, just trying to back up and not let the T-72 hit me, because it's a Russian tank. They have more than enough penetration to go through the side, and they do a lot of damage. And yet another Bagopanzer meets his demise. Bagopanzer mode activate. Now another disadvantage you can see here is the gun elevation sucks on this tank as well, so don't do what I just did there and try to put your butt up a hill, because you're not going to be able to raise the gun enough to actually shoot at anything. Now I know that T-72 is just hanging out back there. He ran away, but he's on the other side of the hill, so I'm not in his line of fire, and none of my team seems to be rushing to get up there and get some spots. We already lost one guy, so I decided, what the hell, I might as well get up there and get these spots in so we can move on into the town. I'm actually surprised, because it used to be as soon as that cap moved from the middle to the middle of the town, there were tanks going everywhere. I bounced another shot, this time from a Bagel. But it used to be that you got rushed into the town and they made it their entire purpose in life, the AI, to run in there and get into the center of town as quickly as possible. But we were wasting several seconds here cleaning out the rest of these tanks so that they can't flank us and roll into the town behind us. And we're not getting any enemy tanks going into the middle of the town, which is kind of nice, but much different than what I remember the last time I played this map. The expeditionary tank, I definitely focused him as quickly as I could, because he is another one of those tanks that has very high penetration, and even from the front, he has a very good chance, even aiming at the front of my turret, to actually go through it. The likelihood is much lower just because of the extra armor and the angling on this thing, but it's still a possibility, and they hit so hard. I mean, they hit harder than I do even as a player, and it's kind of like, you know, hey, that's not fair, but you know, it's AI, so we deal with it. Anyway, going ahead, moving up into the town. I'm wondering where the hell the computer is. It's not in the cap circle, and by now in the older renditions of this map, there'd be 15 tanks in here by now, which is kind of throwing me off. So I poke up just to get some vision, just checking things out. And apparently a couple other people on my team didn't know that spawns had really moved either, because they're all kind of in the middle of the town, and except for this one guy that's just making a beeline around the outer edge to light up a lot of targets, and then that leaves us scrambling to catch up. Not sure which way I should go. Just looked like I might have some shots here and there, but I decided, well, might as well go out here because my guy is sort of here by himself. But it is a T-72, so I'm not worried that he's going to die. And here's where the crappy gun depression, you can definitely see you don't want to be ridge fighting at all. Here it's only working because I'm down the slope a little bit, and that's the only way you can really make it work. You can't do any kind of ridgeline fighting. You can't really do a lot of reacquiring of targets very fast because of the slow turret traverse. Oh, and here's where the aim speed just slightly off, and I missed the chance to kill the Terminator by oh so short of a few seconds. Decided to go ahead and just stay out here and push around. It looked like we're cleaning them up pretty good, so I was no longer in any kind of fear of actually dying. But that could have been bad, actually. That's a VFM-5, another of the Stingray family that could have, in fact, shot right through me. He was turning his turret to get a shot at me. It probably would have been a snapshot that took about half of my health. Here I decided to try out the mountain climbing capabilities of the tank, which seem to be kind of bad. You don't want to get this on too much of a slope if you're going too slow. It just doesn't have very good engine power. Like I said, the top speed on this is really good, almost 65 kilometers an hour, but because I don't have off-road driving and my crew kind of suck right now because they're low level, they're only level 2, the mobility is not as good as it will be once they're maxed out and I get off-road driving. So you can tell if you don't have a good crew for this tank, your mobility is not very good. It's not going to go up to 65 kilometers an hour unless you're going down a hill that's paved roads. So don't expect to see 65 kilometers an hour popping in and out all the time on your screen. So see, there's an expeditionary tank and almost take a shot from a second expeditionary tank sitting in the back playing the sniper tank, as it should, because he's not really suited for much else in a map like this. I took a little bit of damage from the first expeditionary tank. It looked like he hit the side of me with HE. I've already bounced one shot. There goes another shot that bounces. I'm just trying to angle and move. Another shot that bounces. So even from the high penetration of the expeditionary, from that range, it's real hard for him, especially as it's just an AI, to actually aim for my weak points, which would be the giant lower plate on this thing. And since I was moving, it made it even harder. So you can see it can definitely take some punishment. You can bounce a lot of shots, even from tanks like the expeditionary tank or the Stingrays that have abnormally high, especially in PvE, penetration values. I was just trying to track this guy because I knew we didn't have much time left, but my team finishes him off, and that was the last tank. And this was on hard mode, which seems kind of awkward. I didn't expect it to actually be this easy, but it turned out that it was actually that easy, and we ended up doing pretty well as a team, only lost one guy. And here we are on the victory screen. I'd already done my daily, but I got blue star and target. I ended up taking the most damage on the team. Ended up barely scraping out some pretty good damage there in this match. It's probably because the one guy died. Bounced some decent damage. Not a whole lot, but the Stingrays obviously helped out on that. So as you can see, this thing is still pretty hardy, even though the Stingray and the VFM are tier 6s. I mean, the VFM definitely is a tier 6. The Bogomir and most of the other stuff was only tier 5s. The T-72 was a tier 5. So against even tiers and lower tiers, this thing does really well for the armor, especially since it is just a tier 5. It generally has more of a tier 6, tier 7 armor layout, especially on the front of the turret, which is where I bounced most of the shots in the match. But that was PvE, so it is a little bit easier to do things against the AI than it is against players. So let's go ahead and take a look real quick at Mr. Manty's PvP match. Hope you enjoy it. And here we are on the Coastal Threat map with Mr. Manty from Circonflexes chat room. Looks like the teams are actually pretty even. They actually have an RDF light tank, which is a tier 6. And that's the only tier 6 they have. The rest are tier 5s and a couple of tier 4 artillery at the bottom. And the other team pretty much has all tier 5s and a couple of tier 4 artillery at the bottom. But they also seem to have a lot more heavy armor. They got an awful lot of chieftains. So, it's fairly balanced, I guess. It's we got some T-72s on Manty's team, and he does have this. He kind of cuts the guy off there, my mistake, but that's okay. So here we are. We're just gonna roll up through here, and this is where you're gonna see how fast or kind of slow this thing actually is. 65 kilometers an hour is what they say it can almost reach, and as you can see, it's at 40. That's not bad, but 45. We're getting there. Now, keep in mind, who knows what kind of crew Mr. Manty's got. He might be using some crew member skills that don't necessarily increase his speed on off-road terrain, perhaps. But either way, now it's got a little bit of a downslope. Now you can see, now we're getting up to speed. 56, it does get to 60 kilometers an hour here in just a second. For just a second. He goes off and almost made it. 60. I saw a 60, so I'm calling it. So it can get up to pretty good speed. And bang, he takes a shot and it bounces right off the front of the turret. Just kaboom. And, oh, somebody dropped a smoke grenade. Or his artillery dropped a smoke grenade. So Manty is now kind of sort of in a position where they can't necessarily hit his lower front plate, which is kind of nice. Just a little bit of a hill is blocking that. But he sees that there's no use. The guy backed off. So he's clear to push up and pressure this guy, who is also in the same tank. Oh, nice little ram. Doesn't do much damage. I wish Armor Warfare would take a little bit more cues in that regard from World of Tanks and give us a little bit more ramming damage. It's just, sometimes it's kind of fun. I'm not sure what this guy is doing. I don't know if he just gave up and he's just saying hell with it. Mr. Manty puts a nice shot into the ass end. Unfortunately, it looked like a low damage roll, and the guy is left with just a smidgen of health. But Manty says, hell with that, and finishes him off. Now he's going hunting Mr. Chieftain that he was sniping at a while ago. Just so that that guy can't come behind him and give him any kind of trouble. The Chieftain doesn't seem like he's much in the mood to play, but... Ooh, Manty puts in a nice shot right through the driver hatch, right in the front. Now, Chieftain is pretty good. It does have decent penetration and really good armor, especially once it's upgraded. But the thing is so slow sometimes that it's really going to be difficult for this guy to do much except back off. But he backs off right into the line of fire of one of his teammates and instantly dies. Seems like Mr. Manty is like I was on the PvE map. He likes mountain climbing the same as I do. And as you can see, this thing does kind of go slow up and down these big hills. Now, it's not horrible, but it's definitely no light tank or any kind of speed. Ah, he almost made it. It did not have any time to aim, and he almost decides he's going to Dukes a Hazzard right off the rock face here, but thankfully he decides that he'd rather not die and decides to go down, blows his own tracks off. The tracks seem to fall off of the Armor Warfare's tanks much easier than in World of Tanks. I'm thinking he was trying to actually do damage there and ended up actually just hitting the tracks, but he took the tracks off with that shot, so he's going to get some nice assistance damage from that. He did have heat loaded, though, so had a lot of spaced armor on the Chieftain. Looked like the guy's Chieftain was definitely fully upgraded, so Chieftain can take a lot of punishment. They've got a lot of health, and they've got a lot of armor, especially in the front. A lot of spaced armor on the side. But this match is already kind of winding down, believe it or not. The PvP matches almost always tend to go really, really fast. And as you can see, Manty is also trying to go really, really fast. And he's definitely outrunning his buddy there. It looks like that was a T-72. This thing does get down the road. Whoop. Oh, put in a nice shot. Lower front plate. Like I said, this thing is not a sniper, but within 100, 200 meters, you're going to aim pretty well and hit the shots as long as you let this thing aim. The aim time, like I said, is just a little over 2 seconds if you got some mods, retrofits, and crew working towards getting that down. And as you can see, in just that short of a time, they're down to only one enemy left. But Manty's not giving up yet. He wants to get in there and get some more damage done. But there's not much damage left to be had on this guy, but he's going to try anyway. Why not, right? So he's just rushing, he's rushing, he's rushing. Oh! Too late. I'm still jealous of his ping, by the way. But anyway, 6,386 reputation, 218,000, almost 219,000 credits. Not bad. He came in second on the team, and first place was a tank destroyer, so that is actually not too bad. Overall, he made 203,000 credits, and you have to admit that's not too bad because that game was only about 4.5 minutes long, if that. And as always, thank you, Manti, for that replay. That was pretty good. And as you can see, this is a pretty good tier 5 main battle tank. It has a lot of armor in the front. It can bounce a lot of shells from high tier tanks, tier 6s, tier 7s. Now, if you're getting into a really poor matchup where you're fighting tier 8s, you're probably not going to bounce almost anything. Maybe some lucky shots from the front of your turret, of course. But overall, I think for $7, this is probably one of the better tier 5 main battle tanks in the game, especially that it adds on the extra fact that it is a premium tank, so you're earning more reputation and more credits with every battle. I mean, I think it's a pretty good tier to have a tank like this. It's very well armored. I think it's more well armored than even the Russian tanks. It just doesn't have the alpha, and the mobility is kind of, but most tier 5 main battle tanks aren't even as mobile as this. If you compare that to like the Chieftain is a slug compared to this thing. This thing might as well be a rocket compared to something like that. But the gun depression is really, honestly, the weakest part of the tank. If you can get around having only 3 degrees of gun depression, then you can make this tank sing. So do I think it's worth it? For $7, yes. If this was part of a package deal that was like 30 or 40 bucks, absolutely not. It's not that good, and it is tier 5, so it's sort of in between where you're really starting to get into the grind of the higher tier tanks, trying to get your 7s, your 8s, and your 9s. So it's not that great, but it is a pretty damn good premium tank. It's up there almost with the tier 6s like the VFM and the MBT-70, but it's only $7, so you don't even have to spend that much to get it. And it unlocks the Chinese main battle tank line, so it gives you something else to do without having to go into PvE and PvP to grind out a ton of damage. To unlock the line, you can just buy this for $7. Boom, you're done. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some information out of it that's useful to you. If you like the video, please press the like button down below. It does help my channel out. And if you haven't had a chance to subscribe to the channel yet, you can click down here at the bottom of your screen, and that'll give you the latest updates every time I post a video, whether it's on Armor Warfare or any other game that I think that you might be interested in. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. Take care, everyone, and I'll catch you next time.